Buongiorno, bonjour, good morning, guten Tag. I speak three languages. Italian, unfortunately, isn't one of them. My name is Dr. William B. Stanford, and I am the author of the book Lizzi and Fredl, A Perilous Journey of Love and Faith. I'm a retired eye doctor. Uh, I've been married for 52 years. I have three daughters named Wendy, Christine, and Antonella Nicolini, who is our adopted Italian daughter, who lived with us for almost a year when she came as an exchange student. So let me kind of go briefly over the book that I have written. It's about my mother and father's 7 years during World War II. The part of the book that I wrote, the love part of the book, is the love that they had for each other and how they had to survive the war. The faith part of the title of the book is the faith that they had in God, that he would be protecting them as they went through this terrible 7 years, as millions of other people went through as well. So let me start about how I got to writing the book. Over the course of many, many years, I asked my father tell me about what happened in the war with you and mom, because I had no idea of anything at all. And he would always put it off. He would always say, no, not now. This isn't a good time. We'll do it some other time. We had a tradition that they came over to our house for dinner, where we live in California, in Orange County at the time. They would come over. My mother would make a wonderful Austrian meal every Friday night, and they would visit with our daughters. And after dinner, when our two daughters were young, they would go off to play, and I would say to my dad, tell me about the war, Dad. I don't know anything at all about what your experiences were. And he says, no, this is not the right time, not the right time. Maybe next week. Well, this went on for weeks and weeks, actually went on for years. Finally, one time after dinner, after our meal, I said, Dad, you've got to start telling me what was going on, and Mom has to tell me too. And he says, no, 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 this is not the right time. And I said, Dad, you keep telling me it's not the right time. You're 87 years old. I'm 52 years old. None of us live forever. And if you don't start telling me some of it now, it's going to be lost forever. And he looked at me and finally realized to himself, he said, you're right. I need to start telling you about the war. So I thought, okay, how are we going to do this? The easiest way, I thought, was to get a tape recorder. And we have recording devices on our iPhones, but at that time we didn't have cell phones. So I got a tape recorder, a little tape recorder, and this is the actual recorder that I gave to my father. And you put in a little tiny tape inside of it. You just push a button and it opens up. You put the tape in, you close it, and then you record. So my father was not very technical about things. He didn't like technical things. So I had to get something that was very simple for him. This special tape recorder started as soon as you started talking, it automatically turned on. If you stopped talking for a few seconds, it would turn itself off. When you started again, it would turn on. So I gave my father a tape recorder. I had one myself, and I had several different tapes. He took it home with him. And the next Friday, he was going to bring it back to me, filled with stories about the war, about my mother and my father. After they left, after Friday night, they went home. I took the tape recorder out, put the tape in, and this is what I heard. Nothing. Just that. So I kept playing it longer. There's nothing on it. I thought, well, maybe he had it on the other side, because you can flip the tape over for it's an hour tape, and you can flip it over for another 30 minutes. Listen to the other side, and this is what I heard. That was it. So anyhow, 1 week went by, and I gave my dad another tape to see. Maybe I thought he just didn't want to record anything. This went on for week after week. After about the third time, I said, Dad, there's nothing on the tape. Why haven't you recorded anything after I've given it to you? And he said, I was afraid to tell you. And I said, afraid to tell me what? He said, it's broken. I went, what do you mean it's broken? He said, well, every time I start to talk, a red light comes on. And so I stop. And I said, the red light means that it's recording. You can start talking. He goes, oh, I thought it meant that it was told me to stop, that there was something wrong with it. So kind of a funny beginning of our stories of all of these different tapes until my dad kind of got the hang of it. So anyhow, I started getting the tapes back, and then I realized I had a problem. Most of the time, which I wasn't aware of before, most of the 7 years that this takes place during the war, my mom and dad were not together. They were separated because of the war. So how do I put in a book a story when there are two different stories that neither of them were in at the time? So I decided that I would alternate chapters. One chapter would be my mother, one chapter would be my father, next chapter would be my mother, and then my father. And I would bring you up in time to the very end and then start the other parent the same period of time. So this process took a really, really long time. I was working. Like I said, I'm a retired eye doctor. So I had my practice, that my doctor's practice that I dealt with. I had two daughters, two young daughters. I had a wife. We had a regular life during after work. So I could only do it very late at night to start recording and taping, and then starting to write notes as well as weekends. This process took me 10 years to completely write the book. I'm a kind of a perfectionist. I wanted to make sure when I'd written a page that it would be understandable and that the person reading that page would feel what I felt and what Lizzi and Fredl felt during the war. So the book is 424 pages long, and it has a lot of information in it that I can't tell in a very short period of time, but I will give you some ideas from some excerpts from the book. One of the things that when I finished writing a chapter and my dad and mom said, can we read part of what you've already written? I said, of course. So I printed out each chapter. My dad would take it home. He would read it to my mom. And as he was reading a chapter about himself, all of a sudden my mother would say, Fredl, you never told me about this, that you were beaten up and you had your ribs broken. And he goes, I didn't want to tell you. I didn't want you to be upset. Then he would read a chapter about my mom. And then he said, Lizzi, I didn't know that the Nazis almost arrested you when you were in this little town. Why didn't you tell me? Well, she did exactly this for the same reason. She didn't want my father to feel bad of all the things that she had gone through. So let me read an excerpt from the book. The back page of the book actually was written by the editor of the book. It starts off, August 1938. Europe trembles under the shadow of Hitler and the spreading threat of Nazism. Though some Austrians welcome the idea of belonging to the fatherland once more, many more fear such a day. The Steiners are one such couple that dreads that ultimate day. They have carved out a successful life for themselves in Vienna. 27-year-old Fredl is an accomplished master jeweler, while 26-year-old Lizzi is a professional dressmaker. When Fredl receives papers ordering him to Munich, Germany from the Nazis, the couple know that they have no choice. They must leave Austria. As Hitler and his troops gain force in the homeland and annex Austria, Lizzi and Fredl endure a harrowing flight to France, uncertain whether they will ever see their country again. But France holds no safety for them. Fredl is captured by the French Nazi sympathizers in the Vichy government and is brought and arrested into concentration camps and labor camps in France. Separated from Fredl, Lizzi evades arrest and relies on her guile and chutzpah to search for her beloved husband. What follows is an incredible 7-year odyssey filled with danger and endurance, from their long, arduous journey to Paris to Fredl's unbelievable rescue from a train for a Nazi death camp. Lizzi and Fredl delivers a remarkable story of courage, faith, and overwhelming love. So let me read the beginning of the book, the very first page, and it will give you an idea of what takes place. August 1938. The papers that Alfred Steiner received from the Republic of Germany demanded that he report in a few days to an aviation factory in Munich, Germany. He was assigned to work on delicate timing devices for bombs that would be used in the war that Adolf Hitler was about to wage. This factory was to be just one part of Hitler's military infrastructure for world domination. Fredl was adamant. Going to Germany to serve a madman named Hitler was inconceivable. His only choice was to quickly flee Austria. Lizzi and Fredl spoke briefly of the separation they would endure if Fredl had to leave alone. "If you go, I go," Lizzi declared. At 27 years of age, Fredl, which was a common name for Alfred, was 6 feet, 5 feet 6 inches tall, and had always been slight of build. He bore a thick, healthy head of dark brown hair, curly, but always meticulously groomed. I also had a big head of hair, but it's gone. He was an accomplished master jeweler. His large brown eyes revealed intelligence. His superior skill level in working with intricate pieces of jewelry made him an ideal choice for working on bombs. Lizzi, her mother's pet name for Alice, was 1 year younger than Fredl, stood 5 feet 2 inches tall, and had fought and mostly lost a battle with weight gain all her life. Her brown eyes sparkled with enthusiasm and an irrepressible zest for life. She was an expert dressmaker. Her rapid professional ascent would also be abruptly stopped if she were to join Fredl. Their plans to have their first child would be put on hold indefinitely. Their apartment in Vienna that they have saved for years to buy would be lost. All the worldly possessions they had worked so hard for would also vanish from their lives. And so the decision was made. Waiting any longer would mean the end to freedom, and probably itself, life would end as well. Fredl and Lizzi had to leave Vienna now. So Fredl knew that Hitler was coming. This was not a surprise for most people. He knew that this day may come where he would have to flee and escape. There was a French underground secret organization that helped people escape or flee from Austria to get out to protect themselves. One of the big problems that took place was at this point in time, the Nazis were already into Austria and they had closed all the borders. So Austria was landlocked. There was no sea, no ocean where they could go to. The borders were closed. The Czech Republic was closed. Hungary was closed. Slovakia was closed. Slovenia was closed. Italy was closed. And Switzerland was closed. The only open border was to Germany itself. And of course, that was all now part of Austria. So they were told that there was a way of getting out of Vienna into Germany, and then you could flee across the border close to where France was. They were instructed to get on a train and to pretend as though they were going on vacation for a weekend, to bring only one small suitcase, and then to pretend as though they were having a good time leaving for this vacation, not to look scared, not to look around, not to look suspicious, just to act perfectly normal. Their Fredl's brothers, 2 brothers, and their 2 wives also just made the same decision, and they were all going to flee together. They got on the train in Vienna, and they were told to go into different cars, different wagons of the car, so they wouldn't be together, so it wouldn't look suspicious. And so they were all in different cars. So let me read you a passage of what took place once they got into the train. Something caught the corner of Fredl's eye as the train began to slowly inch forward. Without looking out the window, he sensed a figure was running alongside the train. Panic flooded him. Had they been found out? Had someone turned them into the Nazis? Fear forced him to glance out the window. The figure was not a police officer. or a Nazi officer, nor was it a passenger trying to get on at the very last minute. He stared in disbelief at the person running alongside the train. It was Lizzi's mother. She was trying to say one last goodbye. She tried to keep up with the train, frantically waving a white handkerchief. Spying her mother, Lizzi felt her heart sink. She fought back tears, and her throat pained her as she tried to swallow her anguish and fear. A flood of emotions filled her heart. It was almost unbearable. And tragically, she couldn't acknowledge her mother's presence. Her mother risked being arrested. They had discussed this the night before. It would be far too dangerous for her to see them off, yet somehow her motherly instinct screamed at her that this would be the last time she would ever see Lizzi and Fredl. This was a risk she had to take, a symbolic closure to a life that would never be the same again for any of them. Lizzi broke her composure only to turn her head slightly and nod, and a moment later her mother was out of sight. Lizzi and Fredl looked straight ahead, fighting back the emotions that begged to be released. Their hearts were being ripped apart and they could say nothing. They dare not react in any way. Their grief would have to wait. For Lizzi, the image of her mother waving goodbye one last time would last her a lifetime. It was an image that would wake her up in the middle of her sleep on many occasions throughout her life. Tragically, her mother was right. They would never see each other again. All her mother would have left to remember that day was a tear-stained handkerchief. I apologize for being emotional because was a very emotional book to write, knowing what my parents had gone through. So now, after a long, many hours of a train trip, they went out of Austria into Germany, into this town called Saarbrücken. Saarbrücken was a border town close to the French border. The town on the other side of the border was Forbach in France. As they were told to do, they waited until dark. They sat into a cafe near the train station, waited for the darkness, and now what they would have to do was run across a farm field that hadn't been plowed in many years. It was a deserted farm. As darkness arrived, they left the cafe and then they began their escape from Germany. This is the beginning of chapter 2, titled The Flight to France. It was a perfect day, perfectly clear August night. It was cool, with no moonlight to speak of. The lights of the train in Forbach glistened like little jewels across the empty field, beckoning the three couples to freedom and safety. Lizzi and Fredl looked at each other, grasped their hands tightly for a few seconds, and gently kissed each other on the lips for good luck. Fredl closed his eyes and prayed silently to God, trembling with fear. Lizzi closed her eyes and said her own prayer. Their hearts pounded wildly and their blood raced through their veins. And Fredl whispered, Jema, which was German for let's go. They joined hands and ran as fast as they could until the searchlights circled close to their positions. The others followed about 5-meter intervals. When the searchlights approached, threatening to reveal them, Lizzi and Fredl threw themselves to the ground and lay motionless. At this field, at the end of the field, were these guard towers where Nazis were on top of them, where they had these searchlights. They were armed with machine guns, and anyone trying to escape would be shot and killed. As they ran, the searchlights approached them, threatening to reveal them. Lizzi and Fredl threw themselves to the ground and lay motionless. Fredl's brothers and wives followed their lead, lying still on the moist earth, allowed them to catch their breaths. Their their hearts beat loudly in their chests. They could smell the sweet fragrance of the grass beneath and the earth beneath them. Small clouds of fog billowed above their heads with each exhalation. It was eerie to see the silhouetted guard towers ahead that threatened their lives. They dared not utter a sound. Even whispering voices would travel far across an open field in the dead of night. Fredl glanced at Lizzi and saw the terror in her eyes, and Lizzi stared back and saw the same fright. The only comfort they could provide was to squeeze each other's hands tighter. They waited for the lights to pass ahead of them and then sprang up from the ground and began to run again. They had calculated that the searchlights would make a full circle in about 1.5 minutes. Adrenaline allowed them to run faster than they could have ever imagined. As the circling lights reapproached, they threw their weary bodies to the ground once more, pressing their faces into the ground as they caught their breaths once again. The dirt on their faces was turning into mud, and the perspiration blended with their earthen masks. The two other couples followed their lead in domino-like fashion. Each couple was now separated by about 15 meters. Each time they lay on the ground, Fredl would pray to God for help. Lizzi begged her mutti, her mother, as she often did, to protect them and give them strength. They held each other's hands, not knowing if it would be for the last time, praying that they would not hear a bullet screaming towards them. They welcomed the period of rest, yet the time passed excruciatingly slowly as they lay vulnerable and exposed to the ever-searching eyes of the Nazis in their menacing towers. A tug on Lizzi's hand from Fredl, and they quickly rose to resume the run to freedom. For the next 90 minutes, they ran and froze, ran and froze, all the time knowing they were getting closer and closer to the French border. They would know that they had reached French soil when the rotating searchlights could no longer light their bodies. The last dash to freedom seemed to happen in slow motion as they feared that their fatigued legs might not carry them all the way. Then, seeing that they had outraced their tormenting beacons of light, Lizzi and Fredl embraced, uttered a quiet, nervous laugh, and kissed each other, holding hands once more. They closed their eyes. Fredl thanked God for giving him strength and guidance, and Lizzi thanked her mutti, who was always by her side. A few minutes later, Ansel and Elise joined them, and shortly thereafter, Fritz and Betty, Fredl's two brothers and their two wives. Well, once they got across the border, they were told to go to another town called Metz, where they could catch a train to Paris, where they would be free from the Nazi influence. They made their way into Paris. The refugee center that was there helped them find a small apartment where they could live, and got them a few little jobs so they could earn a little bit of money. About 1 month later, the French government had decided that all refugees that were in France had to move. They were fearful that there were spies there that would somehow hurt the French citizens that were there. So they had to move to a town called Rouen, which was about 150 kilometers west of Paris. They lived a relatively normal life for about a year together. Then on September the 1st, 1939, Hitler and the Nazis invaded Poland and World War II was declared. Shortly after that, Fredl got a letter from the police department and said that he had to report to the police department because they were forming an Austrian legion of men who would fight alongside the French against the Nazis. When he and his two brothers arrived, they realized that this was a lie. There was no Austrian legion. They were being sent to a concentration camp and internment camps in France because they were fearful that these Austrians, expatriates, would be spies. At this point in time, Fredl and Lizzi are separated. Fredl has gone to 5 or 6 different concentration camps over the course of the next 5, 6 years. Too many to explain to you who they were, or where they were, but mostly at this point in time, Lizzi and Fredl were separated. Every once in a while, Lizzi would get information from the resistance fighters, the French underground, who was against the Vichy government, who were pro-Nazis, and that's why they arrested Fredl and his brothers and other Austrians. Every once in a while, they would get communication from them, finding out where they were, and she could send a letter, and then sometimes Fredl could send a letter back, but then as he moved away to another concentration camp that they were moved, they lost communications. They didn't know where either of them were. One of the concentration internment camps that he wound up going to was in Bassans, which is in the southern part of France, near Bordeaux. It was very close to a very religious site in the Pyrenees in southern France called Lourdes. They were told that miracles took place in Lourdes, and it was a recognized place of worship and prayer. We'll read you a short passage. A French peasant girl named Bernadette Soubriou claimed at the age of 14 that she had experienced numerous visions of the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ. The Virgin Mary imparted miraculous powers of healing to the waters of a spring inside a grotto, which is like a cave, this is where she appeared to Bernadette. The Roman Catholic Church declared the visions authentic and that they were real, and miracles did take place, and the Lourdes Grotto became a shrine for pilgrims all over the world. Over 1 million citizens, people from all around, visited Lourdes for these reasons. So I'm going to read you a small passage of when Fredl arrived in Lourdes. Fredl stayed in the cave for just a few minutes. Water from the underground spring was seeping through the side of the mountain in a steady trickle about 2 meters above the ground. Some people drank the water, others touched it and crossed themselves. Everyone seemed to say a special prayer after coming in contact with the water. Fredl waited his turn to touch the little stream. He reached his right hand out and let the water flow over his fingers. He then crossed himself and prayed silently. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, amen. Blessed Mary, Mother of God, please make sure Lizzi is all right. Help me find her. Show me the way. Fredl was skeptical of the mystical powers supposedly that existed at Lourdes, but he felt less cynical upon leaving the grotto. He walked toward the area where a large crowd of people congregated in front of a life-size statue of the Virgin Mary. The white marble statue was as beautiful as it was inspiring. A short distance away was another statue. This one was of Saint Bernadette. An inscription described her short life. Fredl was astonished to read that she was buried in a town called Nevers. My God, he thought. That's the last place where Lizzi lived before I lost her and she sent me a letter. A feeling of calm came over him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Perhaps Lourdes was a place where miracles really did come true. There were millions of visitors each year, all praying for miracles of their own. His prayer had as much of a chance of being granted as theirs. Fredl and his brother finally went and found Lizzi, and they were reunited in Nevers in a small apartment. Life was pretty good for a while because now he was safe, or so he thought. In the middle of the night, one night, a loud banging on the door. They opened the door, and there were 2 SS Nazi officers that arrested Fredl and said, You are a spy. You are coming with us. He left with the two men, could not even say goodbye to Lizzi, and then went to a detention camp called Nexon in France, where he was interrogated for hours and he was accused of being a spy. My father said he was not a spy, but they didn't believe him. The following day, he was put on a train that was going to go to either Auschwitz in Poland or Dachau in Germany, and they were death camps where he was going to be executed. So, sorry for the pause here. So he got on the train. Lizzi, in the meantime, with the help of the French underground, found out that he was going to leave the next day, and they said they will try to rescue him from this train. As the train left the concentration camp, a short while later, when they were in the middle of a forest, the train unexpectedly stopped. A French resistance fighter got onto the train, killed the Nazi guard, and the 7 men that were in the last wagon, which was where my father was in, he said, get out, quickly. There was 8 bicycles that were left in the forest for them to escape on. The rest of the 101 men, there was 107 men on the train, they all left, unfortunately, probably to their deaths. Fredl and the 6 other men that were on the bicycles bicycled back into the town, which was far away, and Fredl was now safe from the Nazis. D-Day took place shortly thereafter in 1945. Once they got the military, the U.S. forces, the Canadian forces, and British forces invaded France and defeated the Nazis, and shortly thereafter, the war was over. Fredl couldn't believe the luck that now they were going to be safe, because he remembered the words that when he got on the train, he had said to himself, "This is it. I will never see Lizzi again. I'll never see my mother or father again, or my brothers and sisters. I'll never have children, and I'll never see America. Is this how my life will end, God? What sins have I committed to deserve this? What kind of God are you?" So when D-Day arrived, he thought to himself, those words, I should have always believed in God. He was taking care of me. Well, one of his dreams came true. On November the 8th, 1946, 4 years after they have moved from the town where they were in to Paris, they had a child, a son, by the name of William Bernard Steiner. His parents called him Willy, which was a nickname for William. Oh, by the way, that's me. Our names were Steiner at that time. It didn't change to Stanford until we got to the United States, when one of the brothers who had arrived first changed his name from Steiner to Stanford because he didn't want to have a name that sounded German because of what had happened with the Nazis. So I will read you a passage of when they now go to the United States. Between 1945 and 1950, my father tried to get papers so he could immigrate to the United States, but there was a clerical mistake made by one of the secretaries at the embassy. And instead of writing that they were Austrians that had fled Europe, they wrote down that they were Germans. And being Germans, they had a very small quota of people who could leave, which is why it took almost 5 years for them to immigrate to the United States. Finally, the mistake was cleared up, and then they got their papers to leave. So they arrived on Le Havre, which is a harbor town on the west part of France, got on a ship called the Ile de France, and for 5 days they traveled across the Atlantic Ocean to get to America. While they were on the fifth day, there was an announcement over the ship's announcement speakers. We are arriving in the port of New York. We have left international waters and we are now in the New York City area. Everybody on the ship rushed to the front of the ship to see America. Let me read you a passage of what took place there. These are words that my father remembers. Of course, I was too little. I was only 4 years old. These are my words. I see her, Papa. I see her. She is very beautiful, isn't she, Papa? He was looking at the Statue of Liberty. Fredl was choked with emotion as he tried to answer his son, and no words would come out of his mouth. He held Willy tightly in his strong right arm. Willy was, after all, the light of his life. In his left arm, he embraced his wife, Lizzi, the woman who set his heart and soul free with unadulterated love and devotion. God in heaven, thank you for this gift, Fredl said, and thank you for your boundless mercy. Fredl stared into Lizzi's loving eyes and said, you have given me my life again. The cries of joy were everywhere on the ship's deck, and they were infectious. On the deck of the ship, very few eyes were dry. There were thousands and thousands of indescribable horror stories in the hearts and minds of the immigrants who stood alongside the Steiners. The goosebumps on their arms were from deep emotions and had nothing to do with the chilly air that morning. We made it, Fredl said. We're home. Then he said, throw the beautiful lady a kiss and tell her you love her, Willy. Obediently, Willy put his tiny cold hand to his mouth and kissed it. He then threw it out toward her and preciously said, Je t'aime, madame, which meant, I love you. His sweet words, innocent as they were heard by all around them. And the crowd began to give the little boy a thunderous applause. They too loved what the Statue of Liberty stood for. Fredl and Lizzi kissed each other and then kissed their pride and joy. Everyone fell silent at the beauty of the Lady Liberty and what she stood for. They were all momentarily spellbound. Sorry for being so emotional about this, but these are things that my parents lived through and what they suffered through. And it was a very, very difficult time of their lives. So let me just kind of sum up what happened in this war. As you read through the book, or if you have the chance to read the book, you'll realize that so many millions of lives were lost. The total amount of people killed in World War II, both civilian and military, were 50 million people. The Holocaust with the Jews, 6 million of the Jews were killed there, but there were 50 million in total. 10,000 Catholic priests were killed. 35 million non-Jews were killed, besides all of that I had said. To understand what that number really means, San Siro football stadium holds 80,000 people. If you were to go into the stadium and kill everybody there, then take them out, then fill it the next day with 80,000 more people and kill all of them and remove them, and did this day after day after day. In 1 year, you only killed 29 million people. You would have to do this for almost another 9 months to kill the rest of the 21 million people. There are lots of details in this book that I really can't go into a great deal of depth. As you know, this has probably gone on longer than your kids would want to have heard. But the perilous journey was a dangerous trip, and that's what perilous means. The love was a love that they had for each other, and the faith was that God would take care of them. So I am honored and humbled to share my parents' story with you. If you have a chance to read my book and have questions, I have a website that your teacher can give you, and I will answer all your questions and email my answers back to you. Thank you for listening to me, and I want to thank your teacher, your professor, Signora Marcato, Signora Antonella Nicolini, who is Serena's Famoso's mother and our adopted third daughter. Thank you for giving me the opportunity and allowing me to share my book with you. Ciao.